I used to think loneliness had a sound. That quiet hum the world makes when everyone else has gone to sleep. That's when I'd hear her. The soft creak of her old window frame, the click of her lamp, and then silence again. Every night. Same hour. Same ritual. She'd sit there by that window like a statue carved out of waiting itself. Her thin hands folded on her lap, her eyes fixed on the street, as if she was expecting someone to appear from the shadows. And I watched her. Every night. From my own window across the street. Maybe that sounds strange, but when you live alone for as long as I have, people's routines become comforting. Familiar. Like the ticking of a clock that reminds you time is still moving. Her name was Helen. At least, that's what the postman called her. A quiet woman in her late 70s, silver hair always in a bun, long skirts even in summer. She moved like someone who was always careful not to disturb the air around her. The first time I noticed her was a rainy night in October. I'd been up late reading when I saw a faint glow across the street. Her living room lamp, the kind with the yellow shade. She was sitting there, completely still, staring out into the storm. At first, I thought she might be looking for her cat or something. But no, there was no cat. No movement. Just her and the rain, and that unwavering gaze toward the road. And she kept doing it. Every night. I started wondering, who was she waiting for? Sometimes I'd see her mouth move, whispering something I couldn't hear. Sometimes she'd lift her hand slightly, as if waving at someone invisible. And then she'd let it drop again, defeated. There was something so heavy about that gesture, like it carried years of disappointment. Then one night something changed. A car pulled up in front of her house. A dark blue sedan, old but clean. I leaned forward, pressing against the glass, feeling that rush of curiosity that only comes when you know you're witnessing something private. A man got out. Younger, maybe in his 40s. He didn't look like family. He didn't even go to the door. He just stood by the mailbox, looking up at her window. And she froze. Her hand went to her chest, and for the first time since I'd been watching her, I saw her smile. Not wide, not happy, more like relief. The man stayed there for a few seconds, then turned, got back into his car, and drove away. She didn't move, just kept staring after him, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I noticed something odd. Her curtains were still open, sunlight spilling into the empty room. And she was gone. All day her house was quiet. That evening I saw her again, back at her post by the window, as if nothing had happened. But this time she was holding something in her hand. A small framed photo. I couldn't see the face from where I sat, but she held it close, tracing it with her fingers like she was memorizing it. I started making tea earlier just so I could sit and watch her. I told myself it wasn't spying. It was keeping her company. And maybe that's true, because after a while I realized she wasn't the only one waiting. I was too. There's a kind of bond that forms between two lonely souls, even if they never speak. You start to breathe in rhythm with them, feel their silence like it's part of your own heartbeat. Weeks went by like that. Then winter came, and with it a new visitor. A young woman, maybe late 20s, started showing up every few days. She'd bring bags, groceries maybe. She'd stay for an hour or so, then leave quickly, always wiping her eyes on the way out. Helen never looked at her through the window afterward, only at the street. Always the street. I began to imagine stories. Maybe that man in the blue sedan was her son. Maybe he'd left years ago, and she still waited for him to come back. Or maybe she'd lost someone else. A husband, a lover, a brother. And the window was her only way of pretending the world hadn't completely forgotten him. Then came Christmas Eve. The neighborhood was lit with colored lights and fake snowmen. I remember standing at my kitchen sink, watching people laugh and hug and disappear into warm houses. But her window was dark. For the first time in months, her light didn't come on. I felt uneasy. I waited. Midnight came and went. Nothing. The next morning I couldn't stand it. I put on my coat and crossed the street. Her mailbox was stuffed full of letters. The steps were icy, and the porch creaked under my feet. I hesitated at the door, listening. Nothing. Just the faint ticking of a clock inside. I knocked once, twice, and then slowly I heard the lock turn. She opened the door just a crack. Her face looked different, pale, hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. Yes, she said softly. I stumbled for words. I just wanted to check on you. I live across the street. She stared at me for a long moment before she nodded. That's kind of you. Her voice was like dry paper. I asked if she was all right. She smiled weakly and said, I'm fine. Just tired. Behind her I saw the lamp, the chair, the window, and on the small table beside it, a plate with untouched cookies and 2 teacups. 2. She noticed my eyes drift toward them and quickly stepped aside, blocking the view. Merry Christmas, she whispered and closed the door. That night her light came back on, but she didn't sit in her chair anymore. She stood. For hours. Hands resting on the glass, face almost pressed against it. Sometimes she'd whisper something I couldn't hear, and once, I swear, I saw her lips form the word home. I should have stopped watching then, but I couldn't, because deep down I think I needed to believe she wasn't completely alone, that maybe someone really was coming back for her. Days passed. Snow melted. The man in the blue car didn't return. Neither did the young woman. And then one evening I noticed something strange. Her curtain fluttered, but the window was closed. I frowned, leaned closer. Then I realized it wasn't moving from the wind. Someone was inside. A shadow crossed behind her chair. A tall figure. Male. My heart stopped. Helen didn't move. The shadow paused, then disappeared into the back of the room. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Go over? But then the lamp turned off, and the house went dark. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning her window was open wide, curtains blowing in the breeze, the chair empty, and on the windowsill a single cup of tea, steam still rising. That was the first time I felt it, a cold, gnawing fear, because I realized something then. She wasn't waiting for someone who was gone. She was waiting for someone who could never come back, and I think somehow she finally understood that. After that morning, something in me changed. It's strange, isn't it? How a stranger's silence can crawl under your skin, settle somewhere between your ribs, and stay there. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about that empty chair, that steaming cup. Who had been in her house that night? I tried to convince myself it was the young woman again. Maybe she'd come by to check on Helen. Maybe they'd had tea together and talked until dawn. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. The young woman's visits were never at night, and she never stayed long. For days the window remained open, even when the air turned sharp and cold. Her curtain swayed like a ghostly hand waving at the street. Then one evening the light came on again. I froze mid-step, teacup in hand. The lamp glowed softly, casting that familiar amber light across her living room. And there she was, Helen, sitting in her chair. At least I thought it was her. Her posture was off. Her hair was loose, not pinned up like usual. She kept turning her head toward the window, as if listening for something. I remember whispering out loud, Helen, as if she could hear me from across the street. That night I barely moved. I just sat by my own window watching hers, my tea growing cold in my hands. Hours passed. Midnight came. And then for the first time I saw her stand up and walk away from the window. Slowly, stiffly, like her joints didn't belong to her anymore. She disappeared into the shadows of her hallway, and the light went out. The next day, I waited for her to open her curtains. She didn't. The day after, still nothing. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went over again. Her porch steps were icy, slick with frost. I knocked once, twice. No answer. But then I noticed something. Faint music coming from inside. A record player. A soft, crackling tune, the kind that sounds like it's coming from another lifetime. I leaned closer to the door, and then I heard it. A voice. Not words exactly. More like a humming. Low, broken, trembling. I knocked again, louder. Helen? It's me from across the street. The humming stopped. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for footsteps. For anything. But there was only silence. I stepped back, looked through the front window. The lamp was on again, but the chair was empty. I went home shaking. I told myself I'd call someone in the morning. Maybe that young woman if she came by again. Maybe the police. But morning came and went. And before I could make the call, she appeared. Right there in her window. As if she'd never been gone. Only now she looked older. Thinner. the skin under her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. And on the table beside her was something new, a single candle. She lit it every night, and she'd sit there not moving, not blinking until it burned out completely. I started keeping track. Every night the same ritual, same candle, same time. Sometimes she'd glance toward the door. Sometimes she'd whisper to the empty air. Once I saw her lips form the word please. I didn't know who she was talking to, or begging. A week later, the young woman returned. I recognized her coat, the way she always clutched her bag like it was protecting her from the world. She stood at the door for a long time before going inside. Through my window I could see them. Helen sitting in her chair. The young woman kneeling beside her, holding her hands, crying. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the moment Helen reached up and brushed a tear from the girl's cheek. It was such a gentle motion, like muscle memory from a time long ago. They stayed like that for a while. Then the young woman got up and left, wiping her eyes again. But something was different this time. She didn't look back. And when Helen returned to her chair, she didn't bring the candle. She just sat there staring into nothing, hands trembling on her lap. I wanted to do something, anything. But what do you do for someone who's living half in this world and half in another? That night it snowed. Heavy, quiet snow. The kind that makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. I stayed up watching her. I don't even know why anymore. Maybe I was afraid something would happen if I looked away. At some point, I must have dozed off in my chair, because when I opened my eyes, dawn had already come. Her window was empty again, but there was something new taped to the glass. A photograph. I grabbed my coat, ran outside, and squinted through the morning light. The picture was old, faded, wrinkled. It showed a young man in a uniform, smiling shyly at the camera. Behind him an open field, bright sky. And written across the bottom in careful cursive were the words, "Come home soon." The handwriting was unmistakable. Hers. That was the moment I knew. Whoever she was waiting for. He wasn't just gone. He was gone for good. But still she waited. Every night the same ritual. The same light. The same impossible hope. Weeks blurred into months. The world moved on. People decorated for spring. Flowers began to bloom. But Helen stayed frozen in winter. One evening, I saw her standing by the window, clutching the photo against her chest. Her lips moved, and even though I couldn't hear her, I could read them this time. She said, "I'm sorry." Then she blew out the candle, and the light went out for good. The next day, her house was quiet. Curtains drawn. No sound, no movement. But around noon, a car pulled up. The same blue sedan. The man stepped out, older now, his hair grayer than before. He stood by the mailbox again, looking at the window. But when he saw it dark, he hesitated. I watched as he finally went to the door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Louder. Still nothing. Then he tried the handle. It opened. He disappeared inside. Minutes passed. 10. 15. Then I saw him again. He came out slowly, holding something small in his hands. The framed photograph. He stood there on the porch, staring down at it for what felt like forever. And when he looked up, he looked directly at my window. Our eyes met for just a moment. His face was pale, stunned, like he'd seen something he couldn't quite understand. Then he got into his car and drove away. He never came back. That night, I sat by my window again, staring at hers. Empty. Dark. And yet, I swear, I saw a flicker of movement. Just a shadow passing by, as if someone had walked into the room. Maybe it was my reflection. Maybe it was nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the end of something I didn't know I'd been a part of. The next morning, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. The young woman came by once more, carrying a box. She stayed inside for hours. When she left, her eyes were red, but she was smiling. Not a happy smile. A peaceful one. I didn't see her again. Weeks later, new people moved in, a couple maybe in their 30s. They painted the walls, replaced the curtains, cut the old rosebush that had grown wild by the porch. And yet, every night when the sun set, I found myself glancing at that window, expecting to see a faint yellow glow. But it never came back. Still, sometimes when the street is quiet, and the wind hums through the trees, I hear it. The soft creak of her window frame, the click of her lamp, and I catch myself whispering, "Good night, Helen," because maybe some people never really leave. They just stop waiting. After Helen's house went dark, the street felt different, quieter somehow, like the air itself was holding a secret. For weeks, I tried to go back to my old life. Morning coffee, the newspaper, the radio humming softly in the kitchen. But every small sound reminded me of her. The scrape of my chair, the click of a teacup, the faint groan of my own window when I opened it. They were all echoes of her. I kept telling myself it was silly to miss someone I'd barely spoken to. But missing doesn't always need permission, does it? Just happens. I told myself to stop watching that house. But my eyes wouldn't listen. The new couple, Mark and Emily, I later learned, were sweet, full of life, always laughing. Their laughter cut through the air like sunlight. And still I couldn't stand it. They didn't belong there. Not in her house. I watched them hang new curtains, throw out the old lamp. I wanted to knock on their door and tell them, "Don't. Leave it. Leave it all the way it was." But I didn't, because what would I say? That their house belonged to a ghost? The nights were the worst. Even though Helen was gone, I couldn't stop looking toward that window. Every night around the same time, my hand would move on its own, pushing the curtain aside. And for a moment I'd almost expect to see her there, sitting quietly, waiting. But instead there was only my reflection, old, alone, waiting for nothing. One evening I saw Emily standing by the window, her face pale in the lamplight. She looked uneasy, like she could feel someone watching her. I stepped back quickly, ashamed. But the next night she was there again. And again after that. She'd look out for a few seconds, glance down the street, then pull the curtains shut. It was strange, the way she looked, almost as if she recognized something familiar in that ritual. And then one night it happened. I woke up to voices, muffled, sharp, drifting through the cold air. I got up, went to the window. Mark and Emily were outside, arguing near the car. Their words were carried by the wind, just enough for me to catch fragments. "Told you not to open it. It was already unlocked. Don't say that name again." I froze. "What name?" Emily's voice cracked. "She left it for a reason, Mark. We shouldn't." He cut her off, slamming the car door. The engine started, headlights flared, and he drove off down the street. Emily stood there for a long time, hugging herself, staring at the house. Then she looked up right at me. And I swear her lips moved. She whispered something. One word. "Helen." My breath caught. She turned, went inside, and closed the door. After that, I couldn't stay away. I watched every night. I noticed little things. The way the curtain in the living room never stayed closed, no matter how tightly she pinned it. The way that one lamp flickered on and off by itself. Sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, I'd see a faint movement. Just the outline of someone standing by the window. But it wasn't Emily. Too tall. Too still. I started keeping a journal. Notes of what I saw, times details. I told myself it was just observation, just to make sense of things. But the truth is, I was obsessed. Every creak, every flicker, every shadow. It all pulled me back into Helen's story. One night, as I sat there with my notebook open, there was a knock at my door. It was Emily. She looked exhausted. Her hair was messy, eyes red. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "This is strange, I know, but did you know the woman who lived there before us?" I nodded slowly. "A little. I mean, we didn't really talk, but I knew of her." Emily hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the dark street. "Did she ever mention someone named James?" The name hit me like a shiver. "No," I said. "Why?" She bit her lip. "We found something. Behind the wall, in the attic. A box. It had old letters. Dozens of them. All signed James. They looked well old. Decades." I felt my throat tighten. "What did they say?" She looked down at her hands. They were love letters. From a soldier. The last one said he was coming home. But her voice broke. "He never did." I swallowed hard. "So she kept waiting." Emily nodded slowly. There was also a newspaper clipping in the box. His name on a list. Soldiers who never made it back. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house creaked softly in the distance, the sound stretching between us. Then Emily whispered, "Sometimes I think she's still here. That she's looking for him." I didn't know what to say. She left soon after, apologizing for waking me, but I didn't sleep again that night, because the name James echoed in my mind, the way she'd waited, the photo, the letters, the tea for two, and suddenly everything made sense. She hadn't been waiting for the man in the blue car. She'd been waiting for someone who died before he ever got the chance to come back. That realization should have been enough. It should have brought me peace, closure, but it didn't. Instead, it made the silence worse, because now I couldn't stop thinking about him, the man who'd promised to return, the one who never did, and about her, living out her days in that same chair, believing in something that would never happen. I kept hearing her voice in my head, soft and trembling. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? I told myself it was just imagination, that I was letting grief I didn't even own twist into obsession. But then, I saw him. At least I think I did. It was late. I'd fallen asleep in my chair again. A noise woke me, the faint hum of an engine. I got up, went to the window. The blue sedan was parked in front of her house. Again, I held my breath, heart pounding. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Same height, same build. But this time, his face was hidden in shadow. He didn't go to the door. He just stood there looking up at the window. The light inside flickered once, twice, and then came on. Emily wasn't home that night. I knew that because her car was gone. So who turned on the light? I watched, frozen, as the man lifted his hand and waved. A slow, gentle wave. And then he was gone. Just like that. No sound. No footsteps. Nothing. I stood there long after he left, staring at that window, the light still glowing faintly behind the curtain. And for the first time in months, I felt tears sting my eyes, because I finally understood something that I hadn't before. Maybe she hadn't been waiting for him to come back. Maybe she was waiting for him to find her. And maybe, just maybe, he finally did. I remember the morning the curtains stayed closed. For the first time in months, her window was dark. No movement, no silhouette, no slow hand brushing the fabric aside. Just silence. It was strange how much that absence hurt. I had grown used to her presence even if I had never really spoken to her. She had become part of my evenings, like the sound of the kettle or the smell of my jasmine tea. I waited all that day, pretending not to look, but checking again and again. Still nothing. By nightfall, I couldn't resist. I turned off my own lights and peeked through the blinds. The house across the street looked asleep. No car in the driveway. The porch light flickered once, then went out completely. For the first time, I felt a quiet panic. The next morning, I went outside to water my plants earlier than usual, just to see. Her front door was slightly open, not enough to be alarming, just enough to notice. I called out, "Hello?" But my voice sounded too small, like it didn't belong on that street. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps from inside. Then the door opened wider. It wasn't her. It was a young woman, mid-30s maybe. She had kind eyes, but tired ones. I asked if everything was all right. She smiled politely and said, "Yes, thank you. I'm her niece. My aunt hasn't been feeling well." I nodded. The explanation made sense. It should have comforted me. But something about the way she said it, so calm, so rehearsed, felt off. Not wrong, just heavy, as if it carried more than the words themselves. That evening, the curtains opened again. The light returned. And there she was, my neighbor, sitting by the window. But her posture was different now. No tea, no book, no motion. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the street. I waved. She didn't wave back. Maybe she didn't see me. Maybe she was just lost in thought. But that tiny familiar gesture that used to greet me each evening was gone, and its absence felt louder than any sound. Over the next few days, I noticed other changes. Different people came and went, family, friends, I assumed. Sometimes they brought flowers. Once, someone carried a box full of framed pictures. Each time, I tried to make sense of what I saw from my window, as if the view itself could explain what was happening inside. But life behind walls is never as simple as it looks from across the street. One afternoon, I saw her sitting with a young boy. He must have been her nephew. They laughed together quietly, the way people do when they share old stories. I remember thinking how beautiful that moment was, the way sunlight hit her hair, how her hand lingered gently on his shoulder. And then later that same evening, she was alone again. The boy left, and she stayed by the window until nightfall, waiting, watching. I wondered who she was waiting for. That question began to fill my thoughts, quietly but persistently. I would be making dinner, and suddenly I'd imagine her, seated there, counting the headlights that passed, whispering a name I didn't know. One night, when the air was warm and still, I stepped outside and walked across the street. I didn't have a plan, just an impulse, something soft and human that told me to go. When I reached her porch, I hesitated. Through the window, I could see her clearly. The light beside her was warm, golden. She looked peaceful. Her gaze was steady. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. I almost turned back. But then she looked up and saw me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Not in surprise, not in discomfort. Just quietly, like two people realizing they've been sharing the same silence for too long. She motioned with her hand, inviting me in. Inside, her house smelled faintly of lavender and something else, old paper maybe. The kind of scent that makes you remember things you never lived. We sat in her living room. The walls were covered in photographs. A young couple by a lake, a man in a military uniform, a little girl with bright eyes and curls that looked familiar. "That's my daughter," she said softly, noticing where I was looking. "And that's her father." Her voice carried something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, but a kind of gentle acceptance. She told me her husband had passed away years ago suddenly. Her daughter had moved to another city, busy with her own life. "And every night," she continued, "I sit here by the window, not because I expect anyone to come back, but because this is where I last saw them both." She smiled, faintly, beautifully. "It makes me feel like they're still close somehow. Like if I just sit still long enough, I can hear them coming up the street." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. We sat together for a while, two women who had lost different things but somehow understood each other without needing words. At some point, she poured us both tea. I remember the clinking of the cups, the warmth between our palms. Outside, the street was quiet, bathed in orange light from the lamps. Before I left, she said, "It's not loneliness that hurts. It's the waiting without purpose. That's what eats you slowly." That night I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my mind, each one pressing against something tender inside me. I began to notice my own routines, the way I set an extra plate on the table even though I ate alone, how I left the hallway light on as if someone might come home late. Maybe we all wait for something or someone, even when we know they're not coming. The next evening, when I looked across the street, her light was still on. She was there as always, only this time she waved first. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it made me smile like a child. And somehow that simple gesture changed everything. From that day on, I began visiting her more often. We shared stories, recipes, fragments of our pasts. Sometimes we just sat together in silence, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. She told me once, "You can't stop time, but you can choose where to spend it." And for her, that place was always by the window. But I started to notice something else too. With every passing week, she seemed a little more fragile, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her cup. Still, she never complained, never spoke of pain or fear. She just waited and watched. Until one evening, one that looked just like all the others, her chair was empty again. At first, I thought she had gone to bed early, but the light by the window stayed on all night. And in the morning, when her niece's car arrived and the curtains were drawn close, I knew. I didn't cry right away. I just sat at my own window looking across the street, at the space where she used to be. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. After that morning, the house across the street felt hollow. The curtains remained drawn, the porch light stayed off, and even the air seemed stiller around it, as if the whole street was holding its breath. It's strange how much one person's presence can fill a space, how their absence can feel like a shadow that stretches far beyond their walls. For days, I avoided looking out my window. Every time I did, something inside me ached. I'd catch a glimpse of her empty chair, and my throat would tighten. So instead, I distracted myself, cleaned the cupboards, baked bread I didn't need, reread books I'd already memorized. But grief doesn't disappear just because you look away. It waits quietly, patient, until you're ready to notice it again. A week later, I saw her niece standing outside, talking to a man in uniform. They loaded boxes into a van, framed photos, old furniture, small pieces of a life. I wanted to step outside to say something, anything, but what could I possibly offer? Condolences feel so small compared to a lifetime. Still, I walked across the street. My knees trembled, my hands fidgeted in my pockets. When I reached her, the niece looked up and recognized me immediately. "You must be Mrs. Hale," she said softly. "My aunt mentioned you." I smiled, though I wasn't sure my face remembered how. "She spoke of me?" I asked, surprised. The young woman nodded. "She said you reminded her that kindness still exists in quiet places." Those words undid me. All this time I thought I was the one watching her, quietly learning what patience and love looked like. I hadn't realized she had been seeing me too. We stood there a long time just talking. She told me her aunt had passed peacefully in her sleep. She wasn't alone, she said. I was with her. There was something comforting about that, knowing someone had been there when her waiting ended. After they drove away, the house looked smaller somehow, lighter but emptier. I thought maybe someone new would move in soon, a young couple maybe, or a family with children. Life always finds a way to replace itself. But for now, the house remained silent. That evening, I sat by my window again. I made tea the way she used to. I placed it beside me, even though I didn't really feel like drinking it. The smell of chamomile filled the room, soft and familiar. Across the street, the window glowed faintly with the reflection of the setting sun. And for a moment, I saw her there again. Not as a ghost, I don't believe in such things, but as a memory, a presence carved gently into the rhythm of the neighborhood. She had spent so many nights waiting by that window. Maybe it wasn't waiting for someone to return. Maybe it was waiting for peace. And in a way, she found it. Over the next few months, the seasons began to shift. The trees turned golden, then bare. The air grew sharp and thin. And slowly, I began to realize how her quiet companionship had changed me. I used to think solitude was something to survive, that being alone meant life had ended somewhere behind you. But she showed me something else, that even in stillness there's meaning. There's beauty in the small rituals that tie us to each other, even across the street. One morning, I decided to walk farther than usual. The path took me past her house. The gate was still slightly crooked, the paint on the door beginning to peel. But someone had placed fresh flowers on the windowsill. White lilies, her favorite. I stopped for a long time, watching the petals sway in the breeze. I didn't know who had left them. Maybe her niece. Maybe a neighbor I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe it didn't matter. That simple gesture, a handful of flowers on an empty window, was enough to remind me that she hadn't been forgotten. That evening I returned home, brewed another pot of tea, and opened my window curtains wide. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to wait for anyone. I just watched the light fade, the sky turn a soft violet, and I let myself be still. Days passed, then weeks. Then one afternoon, as I was tending to the garden, a moving truck pulled up to her house. A couple stepped out, middle-aged, cheerful, their laughter echoing across the street. The woman waved at me as she carried a box inside. I waved back. It felt strange and natural at the same time. Later that evening, I saw their children playing in the yard, chasing each other with a red ball that kept rolling dangerously close to the road. Their voices filled the quiet with something new. Not better, not worse, just life. And from my window I smiled, because for so long I had watched that house as a symbol of loss. But now it was becoming a place of beginnings again. One afternoon, the new neighbor, the woman, came over with a plate of cookies. "You must be the lady across the street," she said warmly. "I hope we're not too loud." I laughed softly. "Not at all. It's nice to hear laughter again." We talked for a while about gardens, about the weather, about nothing important and everything that matters. Before she left, she asked if I'd like to come over for dinner one night. Took me a moment to answer. I wasn't used to invitations anymore, but I said yes. That night, I sat at my window again, watching the glow from their kitchen. I could see the family moving around, setting the table, passing plates, laughing. And though I was on the other side of the glass, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt connected. Maybe that's what my neighbor had always felt, sitting by her window. A connection to the world outside, fragile but real. The next evening, I joined them. The food was simple but delicious. The laughter genuine. Their little boy showed me his drawings, proudly pointing out the sun, the house, the people, one of whom he said was me. When I returned home that night, my heart felt lighter. I sat by my window once more and looked out at theirs. The light was still on. The sound of life drifted softly through the air. And I realized something beautiful. She hadn't just left memories behind. She'd left space for new ones to grow. Maybe waiting isn't only about longing for what's gone. Maybe it's also about holding space for what's yet to come. The next morning, I took a small vase and placed it on my own windowsill. Inside, I put a single white lily. For her. And every night since, I've sat by my window, not waiting anymore but remembering. Watching. Grateful. Because she taught me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It lingers quietly, in the corners of our routines, in the reflections on our windows, in the lives we touch without even realizing. Sometimes, when the light hits just right, I still imagine her there. Peaceful, gentle, smiling at the world she left behind. And I smile back. Life moved quietly after that. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. It just hums softly beneath everything, like the sound of the wind through half-open curtains. The family across the street brought life back into the house. Laughter, music, clinking dishes. Sometimes I'd hear the father fixing something in the garage late at night, or the mother humming as she watered the plants by the porch. And sometimes when the little boy played near the window, I'd see him stop, just for a moment, and look out toward me. Then he'd smile and wave. Every time I waved back. It became our small ritual, our thread across the street. And I often thought how strange and beautiful it was. How one woman's absence had made space for all this newness, this warmth. I started going outside more. Walking down the block, greeting neighbors I'd only nodded to before. For years I had lived behind glass, watching life happen quietly, politely, but never really stepping into it. Now I wanted to. One afternoon, as I was trimming the rosebush by my fence, the new neighbor, Julia, came over. She held a small envelope. "I found this," she said, tucked behind one of the drawers in the kitchen. "It's addressed to you." For a moment my breath caught. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded, my name written in a delicate, careful hand. It was from her. From my neighbor. I thanked Julia, and she smiled before heading back across the street. I stood there for a while, the letter trembling in my hands, before finally going inside. I sat by my window, the same place I had watched her for months, and carefully opened it. The paper was fragile, thin from time. The writing slanted slightly to the right, steady but soft. "Dear Mrs. Hale," it began, "I hope you don't find this strange. I know we've only shared smiles and waves from across the street, but in some quiet way, you've become part of my life. I see you every evening at your window, and I imagine you've noticed me too." I stopped reading for a moment. My throat tightened, my eyes blurred. She continued, "I suppose we both have our reasons for watching. For me, it's not just about waiting for someone who isn't coming back. It's about remembering how it felt to love, to hope, to belong to something that once filled my days with meaning. I sit here because it's the only place where the past feels close enough to touch. But lately, when I see you across the street, I realize that life keeps moving. Gently, quietly, even after it breaks. You remind me of that. So if one day I'm no longer here, I hope you'll keep your window open. Don't let the world close itself off around you the way I once did. Let the light in, Mrs. Hale. Let it in." The letter ended there. No signature. Just a small pressed flower taped to the bottom corner. Faded but still whole. I don't remember how long I sat there, reading it again and again. The paper trembled in my hands, but my heart felt steady. Heavier, yes, but steady. That night I didn't turn on any lights. I sat by the window in the dark, looking across the street at her house, softly glowing with the life that now filled it. I imagined her voice, calm and warm, telling me to let the light in. And for the first time in years, I opened the window wide. The air outside was cool, carrying the smell of rain and earth. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. It felt like a promise, quiet, invisible but real. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted. I began to notice the little things again. The sound of birds before sunrise, the laughter of children walking home from school, the way sunlight danced across the kitchen counter in the late afternoon. I started baking again, not to fill the silence but to share. I'd bring muffins to Julia's kids, tea cakes to the couple next door. And in each of those small gestures I felt her presence, my neighbors, like a gentle echo guiding me toward life again. One Sunday morning, Julia invited me to join their family for breakfast. I sat at their table, surrounded by noise and conversation and half-finished sentences. The little boy, Sam, asked me if I ever got lonely living alone. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, sometimes. But then I remembered that someone across the street might be thinking of me too. He nodded seriously as if that made perfect sense. And in a way it did. That afternoon, after I returned home, I placed the letter in a small frame on my mantel, not as something sad, but as a reminder, a quiet symbol of the kindness that can exist between strangers. As the months passed, the neighborhood changed again. New families moved in, old ones left. But that house, her house, always stayed the same shade of soft cream, the curtains always open just enough to let the light through. I often wondered if that was her last gift to the world, to make others feel welcome where she had once waited alone. I think about her often, especially in the evenings. Sometimes I catch myself glancing toward her window, expecting to see her there, even though I know I won't. And yet, the habit doesn't feel painful anymore. Feels comforting, familiar, like saying goodnight to an old friend who lives on in the quiet. I realized something profound one evening while watching the sunset spread gold across the rooftops. We don't choose the people who stay in our lives forever. Some pass through just long enough to change the way we see the world. She was one of those people, and because of her, I learned to live differently. To open my curtains each morning, to smile at strangers, to never underestimate the power of simple gestures. A wave, a shared cup of tea, a few kind words written on fragile paper. Sometimes I imagine her sitting beside me, both of us looking out the window in comfortable silence. And I like to think she'd be proud, not of grand accomplishments, but of the small, quiet ways I've learned to keep the world close. Life, I've learned, isn't about the people who stay. It's about the pieces they leave behind, the warmth, the lessons, the love that lingers long after they're gone. I still sit by my window every evening, not waiting, just remembering, watching the world go on as it should. And sometimes, when the street grows quiet and the lights flicker on one by one, I whisper softly, "Thank you for teaching me how to let the light in." Time moves differently when you get older. Days blend into one another, soft around the edges, like colors bleeding together in a watercolor painting. You don't always notice the changes, not until you look back and realize how far life has quietly carried you. The neighborhood changed again that year. A new coffee shop opened at the corner, the park got a fresh coat of paint, and the sound of children's laughter seemed to fill every afternoon. I found myself walking more often, slower but steadier, carrying that little folded letter with me wherever I went. It became something of a talisman, not for luck, but for remembrance. Proof that kindness between strangers can leave a mark that time doesn't erase. I like to stop by the window of her old house sometimes, not to look inside, but to see the reflection of the world outside. Sunlight on glass, leaves drifting past. Every time I think of her and the way she used to sit there so still, as if listening for something just beyond sound. One afternoon, Julia's little boy, Sam, came running across the street, breathless. "Mrs. Hale, Mom says we're going away for a few weeks, to visit Grandma, but she told me to ask if you'll watch our cat." I laughed. "Of course I will. I've always wanted company who doesn't talk back." He grinned and handed me the house key, still warm from his hand. "You can sit by the window if you get bored. That's where Mom reads." I froze for a second. That window. That night, after they left, the house was quiet again. Empty but not lonely. The moonlight spilled across the porch, and something in me stirred. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap, the scent of life being lived. I walked through the room slowly, feeling the hum of the place. The same walls, the same layout, but different energy. Warmth instead of waiting. When I reached the living room, I stopped. The chair by the window was still there, though newer now. I sat down. The view hadn't changed, the same street, the same trees bending slightly toward the light, my own house across the road. I could even see my reflection faintly in the glass, older, smaller than I remembered. And for a long moment I just sat. Not because I was waiting for someone, not because I missed anything specific, but because I wanted to understand what she must have felt all those evenings. that blend of quiet, of hope, of belonging to something even when you're alone. I rested my hand on the windowsill. The wood was warm from the day's sun. Outside, I saw a young couple walking hand in hand, laughing about something only they knew. The sight made me smile. That's when I made my decision. The next morning, I called Julia. I told her that while they were away, I wanted to take care of more than just the cat. I wanted to repaint the windowsill, to preserve it, to make it shine again. She hesitated at first, then said, "If that makes you happy, of course. Do whatever feels right." So I did. For 3 days I sanded, cleaned, painted. I chose a soft cream color, almost identical to what it was before. I worked slowly, carefully, my hands trembling a little but steady enough. When I finished, I placed a small brass plaque just beneath the window. It read, "For the woman who waited with love and taught others to let the light in." It wasn't grand. It wasn't public. Hardly anyone would ever notice it. But it was something I needed to do. Something to honor her. Not with sorrow, but with gratitude. That evening, I sat in the chair again, facing the street. The light outside was golden soft, the kind that makes everything look gentler than it really is. Across the road, I saw my own window glowing. I imagined how it must look from this side. The warmth spilling out, the quiet figure of an old woman sitting with her tea. And it hit me. I had become her reflection. Not in sadness, but in understanding. She had waited for life to come to her. I had learned to walk toward it. But in some small poetic way, we had met in the middle. Two women on opposite sides of a window, seeing each other fully at last. As I sat there, a car passed slowly down the street. The driver glanced at me and smiled. A stranger acknowledging another human being. Such a simple thing, and yet it filled me with warmth. That's what she had done for me, without even knowing. She made me notice again. When Julia and her family returned, she stood in front of the newly painted window, tears welling in her eyes. She traced her fingers over the plaque, her lips trembling. "She would have loved this," she said softly. I nodded. "She already does." That night, I went back home and sat by my own window again. I didn't need to look across the street anymore. I knew the view by heart. Instead, I looked at the sky. The stars were faint, scattered, but enough. I thought about all the evenings I'd spent watching. How many lives had passed through that glass? How many stories began and ended on this quiet street? I realized in that moment that we're all someone's neighbor, someone's silent witness, someone's small piece of comfort from afar. We think the world changes through grand gestures, through noise and motion, but maybe it changes most through the quiet things. A smile, a wave, the decision to sit beside someone, even when you don't know what to say. I stayed there for hours listening to the night breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was looking out. I felt like I was part of the view. Before going to bed, I whispered softly, not to anyone in particular, but to her memory. "You were never really waiting alone." And I think somehow she heard me. Now, every evening when I sit by my window, I light a small candle. It's my way of keeping her light alive. A quiet reminder that connection doesn't end when someone leaves. It lingers, it teaches, it transforms. And tonight, as I tell you this story, maybe you're watching your own window, maybe you're thinking of someone who's no longer there. I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, if you had watched someone live and fade right before your eyes, if you had found that letter, and if you had chosen to keep their light alive in your own small way, what would you have done in my situation? Did I do the right thing?